Hi, I'm Matthew Handley. Earlier this week, I joined Dr. Marcus Peter on Ave Maria in the afternoon to discuss the reaction to the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
Matthew Handley joins us. Matthew is no stranger to Ave Maria Radio. He's the host of Ave Maria Radio's local morning news program, Michigan Mornings, that airs at 7:21, and the co-host of the Flatlining podcast for Fulcrum Strategies that focuses on healthcare, politics, and policy. Matthew, great to speak with you. How are you?
Hi, Marcus. I am doing well. It's good to speak with you again, sir.
I have to tell you, I wish the circumstances were a little better. There's no way around it. There's something pernicious about the general social reaction about the CEO shooting, Brian Thompson. I'm actually frankly surprised at the glee and celebration at his demise.
You know, I am too. I got the news earlier this week, or last week rather, when I was working, and it's because I work with employees at UnitedHealthcare almost every day with my full-time job, and I had kind of avoided most of the news coverage of it until yesterday, and I had the radio on a different network on Sirius XM, and there were multiple callers expressing the fact that they wouldn't have turned in this guy if they had recognized him in the McDonald's. And in fact, a few of them said, well, I would have given him a nod on the street. And that is an insane place for us to be right now. It is totally, I can't say for what religion or faith background these people have. I certainly would hope that if they're Christian, they might think and repent a little bit about that, because that is not the reaction we ought to have to any instance at all. Even if, and I say if because we don't know, the CEO was part of he was involved in some illegal activity, the death penalty would have not been on the table for that. And we can't have this sort of vigilante justice when it comes to trying to focus on a real issue, which is our healthcare system here in America.
Yep. And I love that you mentioned that narrative of vigilante justice, because that's what's being touted, right? The celebration here is that he did something for the sake of the justice of the average American populace who are unable to do anything about it. And that's why he's being touted as a hero. Here's the problem. There was nothing just about what he did. He shot an unarmed man in the back, and for no cause, no personal provocation to the best of our assertion. And meanwhile, he himself is a rather privileged young man who had an ostensibly bright future. He's thrown all of that away in the interest of this frivolous act that has cost a man, a father, a husband, his life. And now society, instead of reeling from it, is celebrating it.
And, you know, I believe I read this afternoon that he was screaming on his way into the courtroom as he's trying to fight his extradition back to the state of New York. He said something along the lines of, "This is completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people." I don't quite know what he means by that. The problem is that we do have a real issue with the healthcare system in America. A murder should not be sparking that conversation. A
murder should never be sparking that conversation.
No, absolutely not.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Matthew. Sorry,
I was just gonna say the conversation really does need to happen on the legislative level, and I know that a lot of our representatives and senators do receive donations from the lobbies that represent groups like UnitedHealthcare and UnitedHealth Group, but that is where this needs to happen. It doesn't happen with violence in the streets. It doesn't happen with burning down the system, as it will, and ensuring that people get heard. We had our chance to talk about healthcare reform, and America voted in a different direction in this past election. And we can't be taking those decisions that we made out on other people, particularly CEOs of large companies.
There's something almost unthinkable about this. This feels like a narrative you'd read in a dystopian novel, that a young man who otherwise had a bright future ahead of him shot an unarmed man in the back and is claiming vigilantes. He's claiming he's a kind of Robin Hood figure, and society lauds him for it, or a lot of people in society are lauding him for it. And like you mentioned, if our concern is the injustices that we see in the healthcare system and in healthcare insurance systems, then it is a fight that has to happen at the legislative level. And if we care enough about the issue, there are things that all the way down to you and I, we can do, whether it's writing to our representatives or joining causes that are attempting to create some kind of reform. This isn't it.
Well, and that's exactly it. If the fact of the matter is that Brian Thompson, the late CEO of UnitedHealthcare, operates under the legal healthcare system that we have in place in the United States, which is an employer-based system, which in most cases for our insurance companies, with a handful of exceptions, is a for-profit system. That's the fact of the matter here. It's a legal system, and you cannot. I mean, you can talk about the possibility of corporate greed, and I see my own problems with UnitedHealthcare when I work with people every day, but you cannot fault people for working within a system that is designed to make them money and to make the owners and the shareholders money. Because, by the way, anyone who's got UnitedHealthcare or CVS or Cigna in their 401k has made a lot of money in the last couple of years. Those have been very good stocks. You cannot fault a CEO for acting within that system. Yeah. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet people that have left that system and have tried to go on to reform. Wendell Potter's one. He was a senior level executive at Cigna. I interviewed him a couple months ago on the Flatlining podcast to talk about what his conversion was. And I do hope that many more executives do have that sort of conversion. But I'd be interested to talk to him soon. I don't know if I'll have the opportunity to hear what his reaction might be as someone who has left that corporate side to go. On his part, he advocates for Medicare for all now after working on the insurance side. I'm not saying that's necessarily the answer, but he's an example of someone who, you know, kind of had a come to Jesus moment, if you will, and stepped out of that and said, you know what, there's real problems here and we need to fix it. Yeah. That's what it's going to take. And it's in the same way that we don't have jihad in Catholicism. We don't run around beheading people for not converting. We have to convert with the heart. It's the same thing with the pro-life movement. It's the same thing here with this healthcare system. If we're going to change minds, we have to change hearts at the same time. And killing people is not going to do it. I'm sorry. I even with, for all of the UnitedHealthcare's faults, I am very sympathetic to Brian Thompson and his family. It's a horrible thing to happen, and for him to and for Mangione to be lauded for it is sickening.
Yep, absolutely. I share that concern with you. And as I'm listening to all of this, this is the reality. This is the system we find ourselves entrenched in. This is the system that we've essentially inherited. And there are ways in which there are pathways forward. For example, just like you mentioned, whether we like it or not, the government is the biggest customer of health insurance, and especially when you consider things like Medicare, Medicaid, and the fact that most health expenses are incurred in the last 5 years of a person's life. Now, you've got all of those considerations, which means that you and I, as a voting populace, and as a people part of a democratic republic, we can make our voices heard, our opinions heard, and we can join those causes. And like you mentioned, there are ways in which we can do this. Jihad certainly isn't the answer, especially since eradicating one CEO only places another one in his place, who will continue working within the same entrenched system.
Yeah. Well, there are different things we can do. I know we have a number of sponsors on Ave Maria Radio that are health share organizations, and those are not health insurance. That is a potential answer to some of these questions. Yeah. It has certain connotations when it's talked about by certain politicians, but Medicare for all is a possible solution. If it were done by the way Bernie Sanders thinks, I don't think it would work, and it would be too expensive, and it would ruin the delivery system, the actual ability to get care in this country. But there are ways to make a plan that would work. Oddly enough, Dr. Oz, who Trump has picked to run Medicare, has written in the past as a supporter of Medicare for all using Medicare Advantage plans. So there is possible reforms. And there were candidates running. The American Solidarity Party, which, by the way, their candidate got more votes than the Constitution Party in the last election. They were running on a significant healthcare reform system. They had some other stuff in there that I didn't necessarily agree with about forgiving all medical debt. that's another conversation we can have at some point.
Yeah.
But there are reforms, and we have to be able to make those. We have to make those choices with the individual choices we make at the ballot box, and of course, obviously, voting with our wallet. Obviously, if we're employed, usually the most affordable option is purchasing insurance through your employer. If you're senior, a Medicare Advantage option is generally pretty good. But for those of us that have the option to buy outside of the marketplace, to buy outside of an employer, look at your options. Look at what's available as for cash pay discounts. Look at what's available through the health shares. But we have to be able to make those decisions. And to say that we don't have an option, which for many Americans is true, but not for all Americans, is a bit of a cop-out, especially when we're talking about the answer, quote-unquote, being killing a CEO, which is what we've been seeing here.
And Matthew, I was going to ask you for an exhortation about where the populace ought to move forward on, but I think that's pretty much it. Murder isn't the answer. Let's be reasonable about this, and certainly not celebrate this. Let's pray for the lives of both Brian Thompson and Luigi Mangione. Thank you so much, Matthew, for making the time.
Thank you.
My guest is Matthew Handley, host of Ave Maria Radio's local morning program, Michigan Mornings. Stay tuned for the next hour. I'm Marcus Peter.